Welcome back, everyone. This is your session on the Cold War, and we will be discussing a very significant topic today. It is commonly referred to as uh, George F. Kennan's The Long Telegram, or he's also referred to as Mr. X because later on, when he compiled this official dossier telegram into an article, so it was published under the title of Mr. X. Why is it important? I can just narrate it in this manner that studying socialism without Marx, Das Kapital, uh, or the manifesto, it's partial. So same is the case if you are studying Cold War, and this dossier by all means sets the tone for the US policy that pursued uh, from 1946 onwards, and later on the Marsh Plan, the Truman Doctrine, they all fall under the same pretext. Uh, when you go further, there will be some disparity, but many phases within the Cold War that it took place. But overall, the Bible, which was referred to by American policymaker, remains this telegram. And for that, we will be covering it in long detail, and this will be very significant for your understanding the way states were behaving during the Cold War. So we commence with the formal introduction of the person, the man behind this telegram, a veteran diplomat uh, from U.S. Foreign Affairs Services, George Frost Kennan, commonly referred as George F. Kennan, and he had uh, significant exposure with reference to the Russian history, and post-revolution he had a keen interest towards the way the Soviet state was behaving. So his first-hand experience was vital in penning down this long telegram, and this was written to the Secretary of State, and primarily this document tried to fill the gap which US was facing with reference to their policy towards the Soviet Union, and for that, this dossier in details underlines the Soviet state's core, understanding the ideology, the fundamentals, and how they are shaping up their policy. So the world had just come out of the World War II, the brutalities, the horrific episodes that pursued, including the Holocaust and other war fronts. And overall, it was an understanding that mankind has learned a lot by fighting two great wars in the first half of the 20th century. So we will move toward peace and everything. But as we discussed earlier, right in the middle of the war, it emerged that there are some core gaps between the two emerging powers out of the conflict. One is US representing the capitalist bloc, and USSR post Bolshevik Revolution led by Lenin and then Stalin, and the way they will influence the entire world. Previously, it was uh, more toward a multipolar where various empires had their areas of influence, their colonies, and these sort of things, and that shaped up the entire world canvas. But post 1945, that phenomena we refer to as the bipolar, where there are two central powers who are managing their areas of influence and trying to outpace other. It's a zero-sum game. Loss of one is the victory of the other. So it was a very tense situation. Every sphere of the globe mattered, and even the outer space mattered as well as we move into the space race and everything. That's how tense the atmosphere was. So, in order to understand how Soviets will behave or how US should draw a policy that should counter them in long run and short term, there was a lot of debate going on. So one of them was a letter that was written by, if I am right, the Treasury Department, referring to why they were reluctant toward the Soviets were reluctant toward joining international economic forums like World Bank and IMF, and what it reflects with reference to their thinking, their game plan, and everything. And for that, stationed in Moscow, Joseph Cannon penned one of the longest telegram as I can foresee in history. And the aim was to tell the policymakers out there. And one thing we have to keep in mind that towards the Great Depression and then moving on to the World War II, US was led by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of the longest reign in documented US history. And his demise in 1945, that brought in Henry Truman as the president. But this tenure had somehow overshadowed the other policymakers. He wasn't someone who was single-handedly managing the thing, but he was the person from whom, I'm referring to FDR, from whom the policy revolved. So based on that, it was a new understanding of the phenomena. The war was getting over. It was the post-war era, how to behave, and based on that, different mindsets or school of thoughts were evolving. So one of the school of thought that Joseph Ken represented more toward a realist one, and his interpretation of the Soviet dilemma as it can be placed, that will be covered as we move on. So this in front of you is the original extract or the copy, which is the telegram. As you can see, it is addressed to Secretary of State, 1946, and you will see it's an outstanding read, very important as a student of history and international relations. What you have to do is, uh, I'll always suggest go to the original thing. Go to the original thing, the original wording, the original intensity of the author, and based on that, then you link up the events, and then it opens the entire picture for you. So it is beautifully drafted memo, telegram, whatever you can call it, and it sets forth the parameters of US behavior toward Soviet Union in the post-war world. That's what it stressed. And now we will move to the context of the uh, telegram, and that will be addressed in the later slides. So we start with firstly to address the question towards Soviet behavior and policy. Uh, Kennan, he basically divides his response into five sections. The one is the basic features of the post-war Soviet outlook, and the second is background of this behavior or policy. Third is how it is projected, its projection and practical policy on official level. Then the fourth is the unofficial level, which is the covert domain. And the fifth is out of this, what can US policymaker deduct? With reference to confronting USSR in this new global system of bipolar. Uh, One extract that was originally quoted by Joseph Kennan in his telegram. Uh, as you can see, Stalin in 1927, he was quoted, and I'll just go through it. In course of future development of international revolutions, there will emerge two center of world significance: a socialist center drawing to itself the countries which tend toward socialism, and a capitalist center drawing to itself the countries that incline toward capitalism. Battle between these two centers for command of world economy will decide fate of capitalism and of communism in the entire world. So the telegram comes in 1946, and Mr. Cannon quotes a conversation from 927 stating that the US somehow was taken off guard because it was moving between the age of isolation, which it has maintained, and now the role where it has become the patron of the free world, the democracy, the free speech, the values which are promoted by the Western world, and with the, I would say, the diminishing of global imperial powers, previously like France, Britain, and Germany, Prussia, these sort of powers. So a new dawn has emerged, and for that, the US can no longer afford itself to stay as isolated, it has to take the lead, and it was already late because by 1946 they were trying to understand the situation while it was quite clear from the Soviet leadership that they see themselves locked in a conflict, which is towards the patronage of two different economic ideologies. One is the capitalist, the free world, the West, and the other is socialist, which is spearheaded by as a sacred duty by the Soviet Union because the revolution first took place in Soviet Union. In the, although Marx's work was there, so it tasted the reality here in the Soviet Union, and then it became a center. It fought the war all the way. It was the major power that took on the Nazi Germany, and the retreat started from them. They lost the most in terms of manpower and resources. So the sacrifice was there, and it was made with a vision that the supremacy of their ideology, which is socialism, will prevail. So we look at the first section, Soviet outlook, basic features. I have extracted the main parts for you just to give you the core of the argument. So now the context is Soviet apparatus, leadership apparatus, or the Politburo, or the party, as it is quoted quite a few times, how it sees this situation. So they, from start, see themselves as encircled by hostile powers, the capitalists in this case, and their existence, their ideology, which they have linked with their existence as a national state, that is under threat. Now, for capitalism, because to them it is managed by the greed and crude national interest and realpolitik, so it is internally flawed, and there are conflicts. They can always go to war, and we already to Soviets, the example is the US and England, and they are referring to the War of Independence that US fought from Britain, and then it received the it achieved the independence. So it was referring to that. So there are internal conflict. It's not one one ideological bloc. That's what emphasize comparing it to them being driven by the Karl Marx ideology, not them. The capitalists, they are scattered all across. They have internal flaws. Their interests bring them together, but otherwise they are always after each other because they are not enlightened or driven by a holy ideology as the one given by Karl Marx, as per this argument. And there are two types of conflict. One is the intra-wars that they fight within each other, the capitalists, and one is against the socialists because they know the socialist power is the antithesis of the free world, the capitalism, and for that they are always looking to take on socialism wherever possible, and to hide their internal conflict, this gets more significance of a war between free world and the communist and socialist forces, which in this case is definitely USR at that time. Uh, uh, Now, towards conflict with USSR will be too costly now because it feels that it stands on high ground. So it says this conflict, when it is imposed on USSR, it will be very costly to the perpetrators. It can be alliance of the entire so-called Western world driven by greed. It will be costly, however, it is inevitable. So, socialist mind or the leadership in USSR, Soviet Union, they feel it's inevitable. It will happen. There's no peaceful coexistence. Very important out in this thing, and for that they need to evolve a policy which is able to counter this threat from the Western bloc. And overall, what they want to stress is that the conflicts which are present within the Western bloc, they pose an opportunity for the socialism to establish its roots in these societies because these societies are morally bankrupt. They are the class struggle and everything. So the socialist call can go there, and right after World War II, where the world is devastated and there's a gap, people are still coming out of the shadow of the Great War, the brutality, everything, why it happened. It happened for, let's say, the crude national interest, not the ideologies. That can be a different debate. But overall, uh, the deprivation, the lack of satisfaction is there, and that gives a right chance for socialist forces to intervene. And later, they address the components of the capitalist bloc, the states that are within the bloc, capitalist bloc. They categorize them into two groups which are present there. One is the Enlightenment. Uh, it is more toward what he's referring to are the people who accept the reality for others to raise their voice. They accept it and they allow them to flourish. And then there are those who they term as the progressive. These are the sympathizers or devotees of the Marxist ideology, the socialist roots, and they are based in the capitalist world and they are ready to take on the struggle. So uh, they have the ability, and as we will see later on in their interpretation, implementation plan, that they can be engaged to take on the capitalist forces. Moving further, they see these progressive, the sympathizers, as an important tool which can be utilized in the global socialist revolution because earlier they have established that there is no peaceful coexistence, war is inevitable, and based on that, now the battle lines are being drawn. Friends and foes are being separated. So they foresee that the socialist sympathizers, the sleepers present in capitalist states across the globe, they are the tools that can be used. And then they refer to Lenin's false friend, who are somehow portraying themselves are as the socialists, but actually they are the people who are working for the status quo. And what they do is they harm more because they give people the false hope of socialism, and when they put trust in those so-called socialist forces, they break the trust, and that restricts the overall development of the ideology, which as per them is destined to rule the world. Now, how Kennan sees this ideology being translated into practical steps by USSR, and now, as I said, it is his white paper to the policymakers sitting in Washington. Now, first of all, to be this patron of the communist or the socialist global movement, the USSR has to strengthen itself, and that will be translated with crude military power. They are they are armed to their teeth, and they remain invincible, untouchable. Nobody takes the bait of threatening them through encirclement or direct confrontation. And that is only possible by spending immensely on their military resources. All right. Or we're moving it a little further. So, uh, while they strengthen themselves, they have to exploit the gaps which remain between the capitalist countries and societies and exploit them through their friends, the progressive, as they were earlier mentioned, and for that, the historical differences are to be brought back into context. This is what their policy will be, and then towards those people who pretend the false friends, as referred to as uh, Lenin, they need to be taken head on wherever they are, and they should be clearly identified as a threat to the overall global Soviet socialist revolution, and they need to be neutralized. Now, that meanings remain vague, and otherwise, those who sympathize with what you call it, their people who are accepting socialism as a voice that needs a space which can spread just like any other. They should be capitalized, more inroads to be made so that the message of socialism under this pretext of coexistence as seen by the Western world, they are able to build their roots and move further with their vision. Moving further, Kennan dissects the Soviet capability and capacity. That's his analysis coming into play, and it refers that this ideology is somehow limited to the party and its core, the devotees who are present, the true projectors of the Marxist or Leninist uh, form of form of understanding the world struggle, and they are committed, while overall the Russian masses, they are peaceful and tolerant toward West. Now, this deduction by Ken straightly in 1946 put forward the context that the core party is not what it seems. It's not the harmony in the entire Soviet Union or the socialist bloc. It is rather nucleus party, the party and its core which is committed, while other people they are bound to toe the line because of the police state it has with reference to the authoritarian sort of government, so they are bound to follow the path. To them, um, the entire context of socialist insecurity is itself a deep propaganda, and it is done to make people fear the outside, and that's why devote itself or have an unquestionable loyalty toward the state which is working to safeguard them from this external threat. And to Kennan, the internal conflicts as translated by the socialist bloc are not what they see as emerging out of the capitalist philosophy. It's more towards the industrialization that is taking roots in these societies and states where this new class tends to be a little more revolutionary, the hotbed for such revolutionary ideas, and they are making this conflict, which by what we can translate out here is that coexistence is possible, very much possible, if this propaganda is subtracted, and the reality is exposed, where the Russian people can see, the Soviet people can see that the Western world has its own values, its progression, its success story, and for that they have the option to adopt it as well. However, in reality, it doesn't happen in a communist state. There are very limited areas to maneuver. And moving further, what USSR to Canon, what it fears, they are not something which are concrete, especially with the aggressors, uh, Germany under Hitler and the Japanese. They are eliminated from those states. That means overall, these fears do not stand there. the new West, which is there after the Second World War. It is committed to global peace, security, progression, economic stability, and while the Soviets, they are still living with the past perception of the world. So now we move towards uh, Kennan's interpretation of why Soviets behave in this manner as a state, as a party. So he takes us back to the historical context. As I said, George F. Kennan was one of the person who had the most authority over Soviet affairs from history as well in the current, and for that he was able to guide his colleagues and the Secretary of State towards understanding this policy. So he is of the view that historically the Russians, they've always been oppressed, and not only oppressed, they have been subjected to a lot of destructive power. They were primarily settled communities working on agriculture without harming anybody else, while they were continuously attacked, and they were uh, they were threatened, they were uh, destroyed by barbarians from outside. That's more to the Viking who used to do the cross raids in present Soviet territory. So they've always seen the outside world as hostile to the existence of the previously Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. So this insecurity, which was historical, was later on used by the Russian ruled Tsars, and basically, while being an agrarian country, while the world was witnessing the age of industrial revolution and mechanization, they were unable to keep pace with that, and just to overcome this thing in front of its own masses, so they projected them as hostile with ideas that are to overpower the Russian identity and their existence. And for that, that fear became a tool of getting people's will and making them hostile toward the West. Now, he points out that over and above, they view the world with a lens where peaceful settlement coexistence with Western bloc, or what you call it, liberal bloc, and that's not possible. The global revolution of socialism, Marxism is inevitable. It will happen, and definitely there will be destruction. However, there is no peaceful coexistence. They cannot compromise on their ideology, the secret mission, as they put it. Moving further to Kennan, Marxism, owing to the quite unique circumstances of social fabric in Russia, it was able to make inroads and topple a dynasty that was 1,000 year old in terms of the Russian Empire. And that was because the propaganda, the isolation, people ignorance towards the factual truth as it is, that enabled a policy, an economic ideology, very cleverly put by him. Uh, from the original extract, it says, "Who else would believe economic conflicts of societies having no peaceful settlement?" That this insecurity, and then coupled with the fervor of the ideology and global revolution, that enabled the Soviets to go for a secret cause, which, although Marx had written and done all his work in the West, there was no other state or society which was adopting this doctrine, Marxist doctrine, socialism, and Russia primarily went for the revolution in 1918 with reference to this. And now Now, the fear is what they the Soviet leadership use overall to put policies of oppression on its masses, justifying them everything as a foreign sponsored agenda. And this has given state absolute powers, and there is no platform for any discontent that can emerge. What's make this form of socialism, Leninism as it can be said, or Stalinism, so dangerous is that it has no context of moral obligations to itself. It is the greater cause, and for which small things don't matter. This is what uh, Kennan understands out of the behavior of the Soviet state. And furthermore, uh, this is one thing that you will see in the last screenshot, which is highlighted. I'll start with fourth line, but as bearing within itself germs of creeping disease and destined to be racked with growing internal convulsions until it is given final coup de grace by by rising power of socialism and yields to new and better world. Now, uh, as a student of history, Kennan is predicting that this system itself is infected. It is a disease which will collapse under its own weight, and because the entire preposition is based on propaganda with no ground reality. So it's his prediction in 1946 that this system is deemed to collapse. How, when? That is, of course, something which became a reality almost uh, uh, with the end of the uh, USSR, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and this system was in detail examined, and the recommendations were given by Joseph Can to uh, review the state in this manner. Based on this background, as very clearly uh, worked out by Mr. Cannon, now, in order to understand how the apparatus work within the Soviet state, so to Cannon, it is the secretiveness, the police, the sort of policing by the state. Now, what it has done is that it has taken away the objective truth, the reality. So, it is such an isolated system where the reality from the outside world cannot reach the ordinary masses. This reflects two things. One is that propaganda machine has everything under its control. It can maneuver public opinion toward itself. And secondly, if there is some meaningful inroad that is to be made to change the internal dynamics of the Soviet society, which finally happened in 1991. So the gap is there, which needs to be uh, which need to be worked out. So we will go toward the highlighted text from the original memo. There is good reason to suspect that this government is actually a conspiracy within a conspiracy. And I, for once, am reluctant to believe that Stalin himself received anything like an objective picture of the outside world. This is very, very critical to understand Kennan's understanding of the Soviet system. And to him, the entire ideology, entire narrative is a conspiracy. And to further strengthen this conspiracy, everything revolves around a machine of propaganda that supplements the other argument. And he quotes it. Sometimes it feels that there's so much filter that the Soviet leadership, Stalin himself, receives only partial what is happening outside world, and the objective picture is missing. And the other thing is, because it's such a closed society, so any Western government which want to do diplomacy or establish relation or make inroads First of all, it will have a problem to identify who the stakeholder is because it's a party. This is what it reflects. Uh, its core, its various committees, its outside arm. But it is such a closed network that you don't have the liberty to identify different actors who can understand your concerns, take the message to the right people. So this remains a challenge for anybody who is operating in Soviet Union. Now we move to the third section of his interpretation, which is uh, projection in practical policy on official level. Now, after exploring the roots of the Soviet policy and its core objectives and its interpretations, now the third section deals with how the Soviet state, in official capacity, behaves to achieve these goals and objectives. So again, Soviet state works in two capacities. One is the official, and one is something which is unofficial, which you cannot see, but it is being worked through its proxies. Either it can be its agency, it can be its sympathizer outside, or some friendly states as well, which are aligned with its vision. As we move forward, we'll see. So, ultimate aim is to serve the ideology which is taught or forced onto the masses, that they are locked in a struggle which is inevitable. It is between the good and bad, and the capitalists filled with greed. They're here to put the rampage. They've attacked us, our peaceful coexistence twice during First World War, during Second World War. They always threatened us, and this will continue unless communism, socialism, as per the spirit of Marx and interpreted by Lenin and now implemented by Stalin, it wins the inevitable war. And for that, anything is justifiable as we will move on. So, official capacity is, uh, as per the first rule of realism, it will gather immense power, unmatched. It will remain secret in terms of its uh, secret in terms of West knowing what is happening and isolation, so that they cannot understand or clearly foresee what has what are the gaps within the Soviet society, because there are a lot of gaps. Even if you see from the revolution to the civil war, one can easily determine how popular they were, the Bolsheviks, and for that, just to safeguard that, they will keep their people under a strict version of propaganda, and not only that, they will continue to keep them isolated, unaware of what is happening outside. Now, to achieve its goal of global supremacy of the ideology, so that idea, the sphere of influence. Now, sphere of influence is like-minded socialist governments across the globe. They continually need to push. Now, when they are pushing, that is where the root cause remain, that it will definitely come at the expense of a capitalist or a non-aligned government, so the war will be inevitable. That's how Kennan sees it. The based Now, a very interesting debate that Kennan touches upon is that where it is officially as a state putting up its pressure, projecting a strong will, uh, unofficially, its tools like its agencies, the covert mechanism of making inroads, and the like-minded progressive groups in those targeted countries, they will be continually utilized so that whenever it is possible, they can take that mechanism to a new length and make it their area of influence, which is primarily something that they totally have control over. The socialist ideology has control. So, with reference to original question that why Soviet Union is so reluctant in joining economic bloc, Kennan rule its verdict that it has no interest in international framework of governance, of economics, of coexistence, because the core ideology that Soviet Union follows goes like it is the dominance of socialism or nothing. So based on that, there is no question that they will be responding positively to UN or any other IGOs, international governmental organizations like World Bank or IMF for something like this. They're only there as long as it doesn't go against their agenda, their unilateral agenda. The moment it goes against their interests or promote capitalist values in some way or the other, the Soviet will be very forthcoming in resigning themselves from such form and erect their own system. So it is already hinting in 1946 of the system that we saw later on in the shape of NATO, Warsaw Pact, and other areas. Now, another element is the colonial states, the legacy of the imperial power, and that was the age of decolonizations. There were a lot of problems going on. States were getting free. Examples like in Africa and Asia, right after the Second World War, the South Asia, Pakistan, India, they got decolonized. So these areas have special interest of Soviet Union. They see as the breeding ground of socialism owing to the deprivation influenced or subjected to the local people, and there they can find allies, they can make significant inroads to increase their sphere of influence and their overall global standing. And to Kennan, as of now, the policy is not clear that how Soviet Union sees its road to global dominance in terms of economy, or rather, to Kennan, their policy seems restricted to meeting their own demand, which is immense considering how far stretched Soviet Union was and its area of influence that is continuously moving. So it wants itself to be the only policeman in that sphere, which is the socialist bloc, and its economy will move around that goalpost. And culturally, to Ken, they will remain isolated. However, the relation will largely depend on state to state profile. If they feel comfortable, which is not threatening, like they will be very keen in opening themselves to states culturally which are not towing the Western, the free world line, and for that there is no set yardstick. So now from state power or policy which will be implemented by the Soviet Union, now we come to the unofficial policy which is the covert policy and how it will be implemented. So the thing is it will strengthen the socialist movement in other countries through its Communist Party manifesto and will uh, win subjects in those countries who are willing to work for them. Overall, they can be recognized as progressive voices in the eyes of Western power, and they accept them as acceptable or inclusive member of the overall society of the capitalist world. But deep within, they will be working for the core agenda that is dictated by the Soviet Union, which is there's no peaceful coexistence and the war is inevitable. There will be war, and they have to go for the supremacy of the socialist revolution around the world. Now, this core is the committed people, and now we move to the rank and files, which is basically referring to the sleepers, sympathizers of socialism, which are present in various countries, and they are like satellite resources which are used to infiltrate various organization, society segments, and win sympathies for the socialist revolution. And the breeding grounds are student union, social organization, women-centric organization, which are somehow aligned with the socialist agenda. And it is very easy for the ranks and file or people managing these organizations to become sympathetic to the mission of Soviet Union without raising eyebrows from the host countries. And similarly, uh, the sphere of influence, as it is increasing, the powers will be used to act as proxies in engaging wars, in undertaking mission to topple Western-friendly governments, or the greater cause, which is the socialist revolution. So that will be done through friendly government. And wherever gaps are present in the Western world, they will be exploited, they will be patronized to ensure that the internal disturbance keeps them away from whatever expansionist agenda Soviet Union is following. And again, it sees the colonies as the breeding ground for socialism, and they will not refrain from any instrument to gain strength in these areas. We're referring to violence. That's what Kennan says. Similarly, those governments which are not serving or towing Soviet Union lines, uh, they will be shaken. There will be coups. There will be uh, uh, we've seen throughout the Cold War the magnitude of assassinations and coups, how brutal they were. So in 46, Cannon predicts that this is how Soviet Union will further its agenda, and that is it will neutralize anything that threatens it in terms of the governments of the states and other people from different walk of life who are influencers, who are basically trying to invoke an individual capacity influencing people, because in a socialist society it's the state which uh, takes everything uh, with reference to setting of agendas and policies and everything. So there is no individual influence, because the same they foresee in other countries where they want to bring socialist revolution. Whoever notable personality, religious, artistic, businessman, persons of influence, they will be neutralized so that the socialist revolution travels as per the Moscow's roadmap. And wherever possible, we will pitch, the Soviets will pitch Western powers against each other, and they have ample tools considering the long decades, centuries of violence between the Western powers. And not only that, it goes on to say that wherever USSR doesn't see its interest in international cooperation, it won't be part of it, and it will try to make inroads. And overall, they Cannon's of the view that in Russia, the power of policing has remained very critical to the kingdom, to the empire, and they see that this display of strength is vital in keeping all the subjects in line. So it will continue the same policy, and in other countries where it want to establish its foothold, it will be using the offices of law enforcement agencies or security to achieve its goal. So he highlights these places which are very important to be protected by the Western Bloc in order to counter this Soviet threat. And we will again revert to a phrase from the original telegram, which is highlighted. This is only in line with basic Soviet instinct that there can be no compromise with rival powers, and that constructive work can only start when communist power is dominant. So here again, he puts it clear to the policymakers in Washington that these guys are not looking for any co-shared responsibility or progression. They are looking for a complete dominance, and for that they are working on various plans which are unfolding and giving mixed signal to this Western Bloc in understanding how Soviet Union want to be in the post-war global order. All right, I believe this brings us to the last section of this great policy document, the long telegram, and it uh, has the heading Practical Reduction from uh,
US policy standpoint. And as I said, the entire context of this telegram was that George Kennan, based on his immense exposure to the Russian history, Russian culture, and the new regime post 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks, he was explaining the ideology, what US is up against to his Secretary of State and in reality the entire US administration. And it was Truman in the driving seat with the demise of FDR. And so post-war US-Soviet relations were being settled here. So he goes on, uh, and the first point, it reflects towards the state policy of the USSR, what US is up against. It is up against a force which is not seeking any permanent peace with the US. It's a ideology that they hold very close to each other, and for that they see their global supremacy only in the destruction of US, its foundation, its belief, and the system it patronages, that is democracy, free will, and the capitalist free market mechanism. Now, Ken deducts that actually being a nation filled with so much resources and manpower and a rich history, so they're up against a big challenge, a quite a big challenge. And on the other hand, the covert operation, which as per the last section, Kennan emphasized that it is supplementing the state function. So it is being transparent in his analysis. He's quite clear that they are one of the best because since Tsar time they have been using some ruthless modus operandi to cope with internal conflicts, and when it comes to external they have no limit. There is no limit to what they can go to achieve their ideological goal. Now, as per Ken, third point that refers to that it will be an evolving conflict. There is no denial to it, and the West, it is up against uh, an entire ideology which rests upon destruction of the Western values, and it is something that has to be uh, countered with a sustained policy. And it's a diplomatic challenge, and the old, like he refers to, depart from the present modus operandi, the present policy that they might move towards a time frame where there is no war, there is no confrontation, and the world can move in cooperation. The idealism of Wilson that we refer to in the First World War, after the First World War. So that's not happening after Second World War. That is what Kennan deducts out of it. And however, the last line is very interesting. However, we have the power to solve without using military means. Now that's where his mind, the policy framework comes into action. That he's confident that although it's a war being imposed on us ideologically on all fronts, uh, by maneuvering in a new policy drive, this can be averted and the matter can be catered for. And towards observation, Kennan is pretty clear that it's not Hitler's Germany that we are up against. It was, as he says, adventurous, and it had fixed plans, and he was unable to change as per the context. Whereas to Kennan, USSR, based on his experience and maybe a lot to learn from the way they entered into the Second World War with a peace treaty with Hitler, peace treaty between Stalin and Hitler. From there, he deducts that actually, uh, if it is confronted with appropriate determination by the Western Bloc, things can go their way, and they will definitely blink an eye. And imagine moving up to 1962, that Cuban Missile Crisis, the world was on the verge of a nuclear holocaust, but still, at the last moment, it is the Soviets which stepped out of their previous position, and this is how the policymakers reflected upon this argument while sitting in that situation room in 1962. These shows the significance of these policy parameters laid down by Joseph Kennan. And overall, as per Kennan, uh, it is an equation where the West has the upper hand militarily, ideologically, because Soviets, their core, that ideology is weak, misinterpreted. Like we will go when we will move further, we will hit this point as well, that the Soviet system is untested. It was formed in 1917 till 22. It went for the Civil War, and after that, it's hardly somewhere around 2.5 decades that it is in existence. So it is not tested, and he points out this ideological gap. Succession of Lenin, when his demise happened, uh, the entire orientation, that from Lenin perspective of Marx, it changed to Stalin perspective of Marx, and that's what shows a tilt in the approach. So the die-hard approach which is there, tomorrow it can be a very different one, and the same situation can get even more worse. So in leadership successions, this he points out, will dictate the Soviet policy as per the argument. And last one, as per this slide, that he gauges that this entire force is concentrated on the party and its sympathizer, the core, which makes it. Otherwise, the people, they are pretty less emotionally attached. So this reflects a space where US policy should be to target those soft elements who are not aligned with the party and its tools. Moving further, propaganda, it initially set forward that it works, the USSR system works through propaganda by inducing fear into its own population of the outside, and then gaining their support for being armed to the teeth. That's what it is. But he's pretty clear by mentioning that they have eliminated the uh, the truth by stating that he was unsure, even Stalin was getting the clear picture. So that is the weakness, that they have departed from the factual truth. So that means the sphere of influence where they have the policing power, their allies, they've installed puppets, this thing will work there. But in long run, when uh, the values of the West, these are transferred to, they become public to the Soviet people and nations that are under their influence, it will be a very difficult equation for the Soviets to hold on to. And to his policymakers, he's pretty clear that you need to be pretty much unbiased, first understanding the ideology, its entire drive, and that's how, in his words, they can reach out to him. And a very good example quoted, the way a doctor reaches out to an unsupportive patient, that's what he refers to, that uncooperative patient, uh, it, the doctor examines, takes an insight into the patient calmly, So same is what is required by the US policymaker. And he points out that the tendency of the Soviets to utilize favorite or resources on ground which favor socialism, they are very important. And to his policymakers, Kennan is emphasizing that media cannot in isolation uh, deal with this threat of infiltration. The government has to support it. And like by holding back, unknown becomes more dangerous. So it's very important that the truth of socialism, Stalinism, that is communicated to the people within their own society and other Western, because it's not only for US, it's for the other Western allies as well, this policy of how to deal with socialism. So that's very important to concentrate on the internal gaps. And revealing our weaknesses will counter benefit, so they have to project a very, very firm, resolute image to Soviets, what they're up against. And no maligning. And for USSR, if they're counting the last point, the stakes of having a conflict, so can I be pretty clear that we do not have any uh, significant relation with reference to political, cultural, and economic uh, ties with USSR, because ideologically they are totally inverse. So they can uh, consider this thing in the cost benefit theory of engaging the Soviets. That's his recommendation. And this last highlighted from exact extracts from the telegram. Much depends on health and vigor of our own society. World communism, like malignant parasite which feeds only on diseased tissue. This is point at which domestic and foreign policies meet. Now, this initial suggestion of concentrating on their own society, the weak links, and in this para again emphasizing that communism, socialism, it requires deficiency, deprivation to breed upon. Malignant parasite, diseased tissue becomes a society. So his context is very clear that if we concentrate on that, there is no issue. And for that, our foreign policy and domestic policy, foreign policy is take head on the Soviet threat, and domestic policy take head on the sympathizers and areas where they can make infiltration. The US policymakers have to take head on. And toward the last, the certain extracts which were very important that uh, required attention. That's why I pasted it for you. Let's go through. First one is not enough to urge people to develop political processes similar to our own. Many foreign people in Europe at least are tired and frightened by experience in the past and are less interested in abstract freedom than in security. They are seeking guidance rather than responsibility. We should be better able than Russians. So this is with reference to furthering their own ideas of democracy and everything. Uh, the canvas of European fabric, which as per Kennan has been tarnished by the frequent wars, the horrors and everything, and for them insecurity is the key. So your policy should feature with all the values the security. It has to come first. So that's why that alliance in 49 comes into being, to extend collective security. Attack on one is like attack on the other. So everybody is joined. So that's what is reflected in alliances. And uh, this zero-sum game where loss of one is the gain of the other. If US doesn't rise to the occasion, for sure, the Russian, the Soviets, they have the determination and the resources to come into this field. And last one, finally, we must have courage and self-confidence to cling to our own methods and conception of human society. After all, the greatest danger that can befall us in coping with this problem of Soviet communism is that we shall allow ourselves to become like those with whom we are coping with. So now there comes the moral debate that Kennan has the firm belief that our values, the Western values, are too strong, too decent, too moral to be seen in the context of the Soviet socialist policies where revolution with blood, like the greater cause, can compromise any number of lives, any number of stakes, anything. The end goal, global dominance, no peaceful coexistence. So he compares that and deduces the conclusion that we are on a higher moral ground, and to fight this war, we don't need to fall down to their level. We can do it in a different manner, like the one it is stated by him of making a policy that counters them with firm belief, resources, determination, and the Soviets will blink the eye. So, this is the core of the argument that Kennan had for the policymakers, and as earlier said, this remains one of the most significant dossier that you will come across for the Cold War to understand the perspective, because the first part is very interesting where he dissects the entire socialism under Moscow. That's what it is. And in the later phase, it is the policy guideline for his own policymakers. So you cover the Soviet angle, the inclination, the war of dominance during the entire Cold War, 45 till 91, can be 89, whatever comes logical to you. And the second part shows the Western Bloc, its efforts that were during that period. So, wish you very best, and hopefully we'll be back with another interesting lecture to all our aspiring historians, students of various disciplines. Thank you very much for the time.